So what we're going to do now is run through sort of advice about how you put together all of these various sections. And I've sort of tried to structure it in the order that, partly in the order that these things happen, partly in the order of importance, but they're not quite in the same order as the way that the document sets it up. So I'm going to start with a perspective from the College of Experts. So in the faculty, at the moment, we currently have at least 2 College of Experts members. So Moira O'Brien, who's the head of biological sciences, has been a college member for a couple of years. And Steve Seames from Earth, Atmosphere and Environment becomes a College of Experts member next year. So the first set of advice that I'm going to give you is from Moira O'Brien. Last year, she came in and sort of gave this herself. This year, we didn't ask her to do that because heads and college members are really busy. But you'll get a sense of what it's like to be a college member from the way that this information is structured. And so this is the slides that Moira put together, which is just bucket loads of text. She came in, she said a whole bunch of stuff, and then she zoomed out, which was an excellent perspective on how much time the college members have to think about your grants. So in the Discovery Project scheme, which the year before she did this, she was on the panel for the Discovery Projects. She had 45 grants as primary carriage, 40 as secondary carriage, and she had 20 DECRAs to deal with as well. So in that panel meeting, she had 45 grants where she had to make the pitch to the panel, and 45 where she was the secondary member. So assume that so these are key bits of advice. Assume that the College of Experts member is not an expert in your area of research. So they need to be able to explain to a panel of other non-experts why your research is important when they're not an expert in that research. So she assigns grants from a database. So that word cloud that she talked about, they moderate their scores based on external reviewer comments. And the person who, on the selection advisory committee who will be doing these assignments may be strangely far from your area of research. So Moira has one publication through her several hundred or whatever it is that says fluid mechanics. And so she got assigned fluid mechanics grants to deal with because she has one publication that said fluid mechanics. So people can be really weird. That fluid mechanics mention probably made her the fluid mechanics person on the biology panel. So she was the most expert. And so she got those to deal with. The ranking is separate. We sort of think of this, that it's separated 50% on the selection advisory committee, comprised of the College of Experts, and 50% based on the external assessors. So half of your score comes from those more specialist people who you get to write a rejoinder to. The other half comes on the selection advisory panel. So you're talking to non-experts and experts, and you're having to convince all of them. So when you come to structure your grant, you want to provide bits for each of those people. You want to provide high-level descriptions that are simple for non-experts, but then if your expert reads that and thinks, well, I want to know about the detail, you've got to give that to them somewhere as well. So they can keep reading if they need to. The non-expert probably won't keep reading. They'll read the high-level stuff and go, sounds cool, and they'll move on. Remember, so that's just over 100 grants that she was having to deal with. The ARC sets the funding and assessment range, so they are going to cut Discovery projects to, on average, 70% of the requested budget, DECRAs to 90% of the requested budget in 2018. They can identify grants that are, when they do this big ranking of grants, that happens based on the specialist assessors. College members, as I mentioned before, can flag grants that they want to then have discussed. So if this primary or secondary carriage of your grant, that college member who reads it thinks it's cool and then it turns up down the list, they can flag it for discussion and they can try and make a case to bring it back up. So even though 50% of your scores comes from those external assessors, if those external assessors don't score you well, so you'll get your comments from them and you'll think, oh my God, this is a disaster. If they've not scored you well, but you've managed to convince that college member, they can still drag you up. So you've got to be able to communicate to that person, because if the specialist assessors have not got it, the college members still might. So again, that's talking to both of them. But if they're not flagged by a college member, if they're not ranked above that line, they're not going to get discussed. So your first hurdle is those specialist reviewers. You've got to get above the line from them, or you've got to get a college member on board. So one of those two things. All right. So this is that 1-minute pitch. So when you get to that discussion, the selection advisory committee members in the room, they give a brief discussion of the grant, 1 minute. So Moira says 1 minute. Kate Smith-Miles, who's the next set of slides, says 2 minutes. So you're in the 1 to 2 minute range. You've got to give them that information because they've got to convince the panel that, say you're below that funding line, you're in the non-fundable zone, but you've been flagged. They've got a minute, maybe 2, to convince the panel to put you up there. If they have to work really hard to work out what to say, if it's really hard for them to remember what the pitch is and who you are and why you're great, it's going to be really hard for them to convince the panel in 2 minutes. So you've got to give them that information. Clean, clear, and nice and simple and accessible. They'll discuss when they do that. They'll discuss the reviewer's comments and the adequacy of the rejoinder. So if the reviewer raised a comment and you didn't address it, that will be noted. If the reviewer raised a comment and you slapped it down and told them what's what, that will also be taken into account. Discordance will be discussed. So some reviewers can be ignored. So they'll see the full set of reviews. They might go, this person is clearly out of line. They obviously, you run over their mother or something at some point. We're just going to get rid of them. So if you do get that set of assessments and you've got one that's really, really bad, the panel will flag and discuss that. And the other thing is that highly ranked grants don't always get funded. So if you get really great assessor scores, so your specialists, maybe you lucked into 3 people in your field. I had this happen with a grant that I submitted this year. It could have been reviewed by my mum, but 3 times, but I'm not sure she likes my research or me that much. But the grant wasn't funded because I got the specialist assessors, they loved it, but I obviously didn't talk to the college. I couldn't convince them why it should be funded. So if I was to guess, that grant would have been above the line before discussion, and then at discussion they went, nope, and send it down. So I spoke to the specialists, I didn't speak to the generalists. So you've got to be able to have both of those. College members are asked to hit a pay line. So this means that on average, they've got enough money to fund for discovery projects. They've got enough money to fund 70% of the requested budgets and still meet the targets of number of grants that they want to fund. So they're going to cut budgets. They don't cut DECRAs so much because DECRAs are mostly your salary and they leave that, but they will probably cut a little bit of the request. So you can request up to 50, they'll cut some of that back. So Moira made the notes that college members really hate gouging. So they hate a padded budget. They hate an obviously padded budget. So everyone knows grants are going to get cut. And if people are padding their budget so that they can deal with that cut, that will show up and the college members will be pissed off. And if you've got a pissed off college member trying to do that 1 minute pitch, it's probably not going to be a convincing pitch. But she also recommends that you do give them something reasonable to cut. So don't put obviously ridiculous things in there, but if you can put some publication costs in there, we're allowed to claim a certain amount for publication costs each year. If you put that in there, it'll give the college members something to go, well, why don't we just take that $4,000 out for those, and then we're down at the right line, everything's great. So that's a reasonable request, but it gives them something to cut without being mad at you for putting in obviously ridiculous flying unicorns or something. She advises that you remember and control who your audience is. Use those field of research codes. So you can check out the field of research codes. Don't leave this to just the last minute in the frantic few minutes before you have to submit the thing. Have a think about who your audience might be. So as I mentioned before, I'm a physiologist, I'm an animal physiologist, I work on evolutionary biology. I always use animal physiology field of research codes because I want my specialist assessors to be people in my discipline who will appreciate the research because they like it, which worked out for me last time, but I didn't get the college. That one's not so there. The College of Experts, Moira says they're good people with a lot of work to do, so make their job really easy. Again, they're reading 100 grants. Make it as easy as possible for. She talks about the passive half point. You make it easy for a college member. They're still people. They're people doing a kind of robotic task, but they're still people. You make it easy for them, they're going to feel well disposed towards the application. They're more likely to be positive towards it than negative. You make it hard for them to find stuff, hard to work out your CV, hard to work out what the grant's about. You're going to lose points. Even if all the information's there, you make it difficult, you're going to irritate them. They're representative of the Australian university sector, not people who get the grants. So you're speaking to people from well-funded and less well-funded universities. From universities like Monash that gets lots of grants, to other universities that have very, very low success rates and might be pretty grumpy about the whole system. So you're talking to the Australian research community. And more often than not, you're talking to group of 8, non-group of 8 researchers. Partly because the group of 8 is only 8 universities out of the 40 odd there are in Australia, but also because group of 8 members tend to be very collaborative, they're very research intensive, they collaborate with lots of people from lots of unis, which means they're conflicted a lot. So when they do the seating chart, Moira says that they put the group of 8 members near the door because they're going to be outside a lot. So you're often talking to the non-group of 8 universities because the group of 8s are conflicted out. They can't assess grants from Monash, they can't assess grants with their collaborators and so on. So they're very often out of the room. And people from Monash will never be in the room when a Monash grant is discussed. So you're never talking to people from Monash. There's no one there to say, actually, no, that's, we have a platform that can take care of that. And so this thing that sounds outlandish is actually really simple. There's no one there to have that defense. All there is what's in the grant and what you tell the person, the carriage, who's talking about your grant. She advises that you avoid broad interdisciplinary research, or at least coding it as broad interdisciplinary research. So her advice is basically look at, so the ARC website says what the different selection advisory committees tend to be. Try not to put your research forward in such a way that you have to get assessed by 2 panels, because then you need to convince both panels to fund the grant, not just one. So even if it's interdisciplinary, if it's biology and engineering, make it biology in such a way that the biology panel think this is cool interdisciplinary biology, not we should get the engineers to look at this. Because if you've got to get both groups, then it's just much, much harder. So her advice is pick only codes that sit firmly in one panel. So biologists pick biology codes, don't pick 50% biology, 50% engineering, because that's going to split you across panels. Okay, she gave me this red box. Read the instructions and follow them. These people are reading, again, 100 grants. The ones that are, so I see it when I look at, so I'm the final approver before it goes to Rebecca Brown's office for the university, the administering organisation statements. So you get really familiar with what the format of these is supposed to be. When you get one that's out of that format, you always sort of think, if they can't follow rules, and you're immediately annoyed. So follow the rules, make sure you conform with what the ARC expect, because that's what the panel is going to be seeing again and again and again. Something that falls outside of that, they're going to raise the wrong sort of attention. Assume it needs to be understandable and appreciated by someone smart from a different discipline. So your college members are almost certainly going to be from a different discipline. Hopefully they'll be smart as well, but make sure it's accessible to them. And then why they should care. Science needs to be awesome, makes the world a better place, and Australia will get kudos from it. And then just some sort of formatting things. So those of you who might move across the NHMRC and the ARC, Moira also moves across the NHMRC and the ARC. So she knows what the NHMRC requirements was, and she found it really annoying when it was obvious that someone had just plonked an NHMRC grant down into the ARC system without paying attention to what the ARC actually expects. She says to use a sans serif font because it's easier to read on a computer. So this is the passive half points. Make it easy for them. Impact factors and citations. Number publications so that they don't have to count them. Make it clear when there are joint first or joint last authors. Make things fit in the space and things like that. So this will all go out to you, so I'll send you the slides so you can read those little details. But the key here is the point of view is just making everything as easy as possible for the college member. Make it simple and straightforward and easy to follow and consistent and all of that sort of stuff. She also says make sure you have a Google Scholar page and you keep it up to date. So the College of Experts member might go and see how your citations are tracking. If they want to know how things are going, they want to know what the field thinks of your work, they want to know what's happened in the 8 months since you submitted it, they might go and look at your Google Scholar page. It's not actually clear to me that they're supposed to do that, but I would plan for the fact that they might. Keep it up to date. Your Google Scholar page also provides you some other advantages, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, so that was Moira's perspective. It really is about making it clear, helping the person out, getting them on your side so that they can advocate. So the first thing that you'll need to prepare as you start to set your application up is the statement by the administering organisation. So the statement from the administering organisation says why Monash is great, why your faculty is great, why your school is great, why you're a great fit for your school and your faculty and Monash, and also what the university is going to do for you in the application. Now there's a bunch of different levels of support that different schools or supervisors might offer. Probably the most important thing I can say about that is that I see all of these applications that come through and there is no evidence whatsoever that this actually changes the success rates. So see what sort of support is available from your school. Talk to either your potential host or your head of school, depending on how the different schools run it. So I know biological science is best, you would talk to Moira. But previous heads of biological sciences, you might not have spoken to them directly. Talk to your potential host about what the way to do it is, or talk to your faculty research committee member, your associate head research, or your director of research. Tell them that you're planning to apply for a DECRA and find out what types of support the university can offer. So that might be the program that they run within the school to help you write and draft things. It could be financial support if the grant is successful. That could be a PhD stipend perhaps, which could go in as support provided by the university. The salary, the difference in salary between what the ARC offer and what Monash expects. Other sorts of financial, an extra $10 or $20 or $30,000 a year perhaps. It depends what it is. Also, yep.
Sorry, isn't that like a standard thing? How much Monash will give you if you're gonna get DECRA?
No.
No, you have to negotiate that.
Yes. So there's no formula at all. The only bit that'll be standard is the Monash salary will be a certain amount different from the ARC salary, and Monash will cover that. But beyond that, it could be anywhere from nothing to something. And that's a case by case. Some schools might have uniform things that they hand out, others might be discussing it individually. Some, yeah.
So you're discussing this with head of the school?
So you would probably start, well, it depends on your relationship with the head of school. So you might start with either the head of school, if it is that sort of head of school. They all differ. Or you might start with the research director, or you might start with your host. So some heads might not like you to be approaching them directly until you've gone through the host or the research director. Other heads might think it's a bit weird if you don't talk to them directly. So it really depends on what your school, how the school runs that and how the head runs that particular process. But the research director is probably the person who can tell you those ins and outs. And then we run some schemes. So we run a review of the first page of the project description in January, where people get together and talk about their project descriptions, try and get their messaging right, and things like that. So that's the first ball to get rolling, because that takes a bit of time. It takes drafting. It has to be written from the perspective of Rebecca Brown, and that's a little bit hard for folk at earlier career stages to do, because it's really hard to know what Rebecca thinks about. So it'll need to go through a series of different steps. So in order to prepare that, probably a really good place to start is to get a template. Monash will provide a template, but it won't have much detail in it. So that'll give you the template for the format for this year. Also get previous applications and see what they wrote. They might talk about how great the school is, what the ERA outcomes in your areas are, what the total amount of funding or research infrastructure investment has been to the school and to the university and stuff like that. Get those details from previous examples and fill in the blanks that are appropriate for you. And whenever you're writing it, remember, as you're drafting it, you're writing it from the perspective of Rebecca. Now, Rebecca's super smart and she's very multidisciplinary. She has civil engineering and social science qualifications. So she covers a diverse array of stuff, but she's not going to know what the evolution of energy expenditure in Drosophila is about. So if I write that in there, it's not going to sound like Rebecca. So you want sort of high-level overview type stuff. This is the first part where you start thinking about crafting that message. Like, what's your big picture story? That's the story Rebecca will care about. So you want to be sort of thinking at that higher level. Think about what the Vice Provost, who has to sign all of the DECRA application strategic statements across the entire university, thinks about. It's not the minutiae of your research, it's the big picture. And then it needs to go for approval. So it needs to be approved by the school, who will probably make you revise it. It needs to be approved by the faculty. I will probably make you revise it because I'm the next approver. It then goes to MRO. They might make you revise it. And then it gets signed by Rebecca Brown as the Vice Provost Research. So that all takes time. Now I get, for the future fellowships and for laureate fellowships and for DECRAs, I get strategic statements at the very last minute. They'll usually go through, but it makes it much harder for me to help craft it, because I see across all of the schools, and I'm not a physicist or a chemist, and so I can help craft that message to suit the MRO, but I need time to do it because I get all of them all at once, and it takes a bit of time. So leave time for that, get it done early, get it out of the way. The other part of this, sort of at this early stage, is you need to be, because part of that strategic statement, you need your project. So you need to be thinking about what your project actually is. So the first part of being strategic about how you're going to go about applying this is actually choosing the project. What's the project that you're going to do? So it needs to be something that you can do. So if you've got a track record on the topic, that works really well. So if you're an expert in the area, that works really well. The alternative, of course, is if you're bringing related skills to a new area, and so you can open up a new frontier in that area that no one else is thinking about because they don't have the skills that you do. So it's not necessarily a sort of a linear path along. It can be building on what you've done. It can be bringing what you've done to something new. So I guess it is. I guess it does always have that building on what you've done element, but it could also be jumping across to a new thing. It needs to be something that you can convince people is important. You're not going to cure cancer. In fact, you're probably unlikely to cure cancer because that would be medical research. But you're not going to solve these global challenges in a 3-year DECRA. What you're going to do is make an important contribution, perhaps in a specialised field, perhaps in a broader field, but there needs to be clear evidence of what that contribution is. So you need to convince the college that it's necessary to fund this project. They need to fork out. They're going to, so I don't know, if we get, say, 1,200 applicants, they're going to deny 1,000 projects in that round. That's going to suck for them. You've got to make them think that yours is one that's worth funding. And that benefits to Australia. Why should Australia pay for this? That could be because of training opportunities, PhD students, honours students. Those are really important contributions of DECRAs. You could run workshops. You could teach people new things. You could build Australia's reputation by enhancing our collaborative links with overseas institutions. Australia cares about that. We're a smallish community, a long, long way from everywhere else. Building links with other countries is really important. And then there's the feasibility bit, something that you can do and can be achieved. So you could have a proof of concept, some kind of bit of a preliminary information that demonstrates that you can actually go down this road, but it can't be so far down that it already seems completed. And then that final bit is something that can do well at Monash. So why is Monash the place to do this research? So you want to be solving all of this sort of set of optimizations in your project. Okay, so the next bit of advice, so this was from the year before. This is from Kate Smith-Miles as she came off the College of Experts. So this was her advice about the project description, which I also think is really good advice and matches quite well with what Moira said. So having a great track record and having strong assessor reports helps. That's kind of straightforward, right? If the assessors like it and your track record's strong, cool. But what's better for the College of Experts is if they understand the project. So if they understand it, they can advocate for it. If they can advocate for it, they can get it above that line. So without that, I think this is a really important quote. If the College of Experts member can't follow it enough to explain in 2 minutes why it's important, then that makes the project average at best. So trust me, I'm brilliant only goes so far. So even though we've got 50% based on investigator and capability, if the rest of the project is trust me, I'm brilliant, the College of Experts member says, well, this person has a good CV and they've written some papers in these cool journals and I don't really understand their project, but it's probably good. And that's just really not a compelling argument. So track record will get you so far, but beyond that, the College of Experts member needs to understand the importance of the project and needs to be able to communicate it. I think that needs to be able to communicate is really key. So they need to be able to produce a 2-minute pitch that any other member can understand, that they can remember and find easily again in their notes. So they'll be assessing a few hundred in that panel perhaps. They'll be writing notes about them. They'll need to remember who's who and is this project better than that other one we discussed about the person who did the thing on the stuff? So they need to be able to remember those details. They can believe in it and they can convince a room full of, another good point, that they can convince a room full of non-experts is important enough to fund rather than the pile of projects they've got in their hand, which they think is great. So they might have seen some other projects from their field that they understand intuitively, but they need someone else, they need to be convinced by someone from another field that this other project is the one they should actually fund and they should give up one of the ones that they were thinking of. So balance between track record, proof of concept, and an implementation plan. So I think thinking about that 2-minute pitch, and we'll come back to this for those of you who come to the front page session, this 2-minute pitch idea will get you to read each other's applications. Can you give it back to the person who wrote it. And once you start doing that a couple of times, so there'll be a room with 20 or 15 people or something in it, you'll see how hard it is to do that, how hard it is to convey someone else's ideas really cleanly from being able to read it once. So think about that. Yeah.
Can I ask, when it's talking about the proof of concept, what sort of expectation is there, like a publication or just some preliminary results?
So it could be, yeah, it could be any of those things. Preliminary results are not so necessary in the ARC system as they are in, say, the NHMRC, where they become quite important. So I often use, if I don't have preliminary results, I might use a little toy model or a simulation. If I can simulate the process I'm planning to study and say it might work out this way, I can show that I've thought about it in a quantitative way. If you do have the opportunity to do a little experiment, or you've got some, maybe you wrote a paper as part of your PhD and you had a little finding that never made it into a paper, but you can put that graph in, stuff like that. But sort of anything that shows you've thought about it to the extent that you know it's feasible and you can demonstrate that to someone else. So anything along that spectrum. Okay, this is where things are, oh, sorry.
Sorry, just so your COE number is in your 2-digit form, is that right?
Yes. Well, not necessarily actually. In biology, yes, it'll be an 06, maybe 05 and 07 panel. They're pretty closely allied, so 05 is environmental, 06 is biological sciences, and 07 is sort of veterinary. So they're not too different. But say physics and chemistry or engineering and physics and stuff might end up together, so the gaps could get bigger. Your first carriage will probably be in your 2-digit area. So they'll probably be broadly in the same big discipline as you. But yeah, certainly well, I mean, you can have a look at the panel and see if there's a specialist in there, someone who's close to what you do, but they might not be on the right scheme that year to help you out.
Oh, no one even vaguely close.
Yeah, so that's the challenge. Yep. Yeah, so you've got to talk to someone really broad. So you've got to get someone from that far away. So you could see who the likely candidates are and try and work it out, how far away they might be. But yeah, pretty broad.
So less on the front page then?
Well, the front page is difficult this year.
Yeah, well, that was my second question.
Yes. So for context, anyone who's read the rules this year and hasn't read them before, you used to start with an aims and background section, which was like an abstract. And so you got to explain everything on the first page. And so the college member could open up your project description, your first page says the whole kit and caboodle. They take it away, broad background, aims, what you're going to do, what the outcomes will be, boom, they only have to read that section. This year, beginning with the Future Fellowship and the Laureate rounds, they've changed that. So this year you go straight from title into investigator. No text is allowed between those two headings. So your first page will be only your investigator, probably. And so some of this advice, or this advice all applies to the previous set of rules. So and I guess we can take some of the rules, some of the principles from this. So what Kate Smith-Miles says is that the first page that doesn't give a 2-minute pitch quickly enough hurts a proposal. The problem we've got now is that the first page is never going to be able to give the pitch quickly enough because you've got the investigator section before you can go into other stuff. So what you're going to need to be able to do, and no one's going to yet have an answer to this, is be creative in the way that you put forward the information that you need them to have. So your investigator section covers why you're great and also why you're appropriate for this project. So the way that I would think about structuring it is, in order to demonstrate why you're appropriate for this project, you're going to have to say something about the project. So you can start your investigator section with maybe, my background is this, and so a little bit about your background, and then you can lead into why you're the appropriate person to do the project by talking about the project. So at the end of that first couple of paragraphs, they know about you and they know about the project. So I think you're still probably going to have to try and follow the principle of getting this information in early so that they can find it. But the rules are such that it's harder than it used to be. So a little bit of a grain of salt with this sort of advice now. Yep.
So something that I thought was interesting is that the objectives in that first section, you've got, what, 70 words or something, so like a short paragraph per objective.
Yep.
So that seems like quite a big block of what are the 4 things or 3 things that you are going to achieve with a description of how you're going to do it.
Yep.
So is the intention really that all they've done is killed the first page so that they can read the summary at the start, what your 4 objectives are, why is it important to Australia, and that very first section?
Yeah. So those objectives and aims and things, they were in the last round as well, but so was the aims and benefits at the front of the first page. So it may be that doubling up is what they're trying to do, and that the college is what they're trying to avoid.
Yeah,
and so,
because those dot points that used to be on the first page, you've already said them in some detail.
Yes.
At the first section. So can we either just list like the highlighted bold bit and not have the paragraph explaining what it is in that first section?
Perhaps. Yeah. So that would be. So I guess you're still. You've got it. There's an awkward balance now for this year. There's an awkward balance between. So the College of Experts members will know. The assessors might still go straight to the project description and expect to get the whole lot. So you have to. It's really hard to know exactly what the behaviour of the assessors and the college members are actually going to be this year. Probably. But I would probably still, this year, I think I would still assume that that first page of the project description is the first thing they're going to read. Sorry?
The second page now.
Well, so section, you've got your title and then you've got your investigator section at the beginning, yeah. So, but I still think they'll go to that first page, even though it's the second page that's going to have the information. So, you know, they're going to go through, that's going to be the place they start as the project description, rather than that front material. Which is going to have the stuff they need, but I still think it's going to be trying to convey these messages early in the project description is still going to be really important, if I was to guess. So there is always going to be redundancy across these sections, right? I mean, that's unavoidable. But yeah. So the advice is that they want to be able to get that pitch quickly. Maybe they will just be getting it from the front sections now. We'll find out. And then, yeah, getting people to read the stuff that you write. And again, so the proposals that you can read now will be structured quite differently. They'll have that first page of the project description, which has got all the information you need, but still trying to read other people's project descriptions and summarize them is going to be an important exercise for how people are going to go about summarizing yours. So we've already talked about this a little bit. So this is still Kate Smith-Miles. What is known, what is unknown, why is there a need to do this, how does the proposal fill the need? And then we start to get down into the nitty-gritty of preparing these various sections. So the challenge that I mentioned before that we've got, which we didn't previously have, is that now the project description, section D1, starts with the project title and then investigator, quality and innovation, benefit, feasibility, communication of results, references and acknowledgements. This section covers off a lot of those selection criteria, but we have a bit of a complication in that. Unlike in previous years, you're not allowed to have any text between the project title and the investigator. So you're going straight from the title of the project into talking about your strength and your capability. Your capability will map to the project somewhat. And then you go into quality and innovation. And then there's also in that investigator and capability section will overlap somewhat with the rope section, which is F. Section F will talk about your CV and your strengths and all the other things you've done, which will overlap somewhat with the project description. Yep.
Can I just mention, like I tried to download the templates.
Yep.
And it still says that you can have the text.
Oh, does it?
So just letting you know in case.
Thank you.
It hasn't been updated.
Yeah.
So it still says that. Big issues humanity.
So the last thing that I heard was advice from the ARC to MRO that there was no text between those. So unless they subsequently received different advice, or it hasn't been updated, the latter seems more likely. But yeah, I'll talk to them about that. Yep.
I think it used to be the case, and I don't know if it still is, in your project description, your project title can be longer.
Yes, still the case.
So that could be a way to sneak in more.
Yeah, your project title could be a paragraph.
Yeah.
That would be a clever workaround. Yeah, I'm not sure how. I've been pondering a little bit how I would deal with that, like whether I would actually use a different title in this section compared to the beginning. I think at this point I would probably keep my title the same, just for that they need to be able to convey the message, and making it different could lead to a little bit of uncertainty about which project they're remembering. So I'd probably keep it the same, I think. But yeah, you do have the opportunity to make it longer. So the investigator section again covers that. So your project title, there it is, may exceed 10 words, can be longer than your title in A1 of the proposal. And then your investigator capability section describes that research opportunity and performance evidence, including the record of research outputs appropriate to the discipline, and your capability to build collaborations within Australia and internationally. So this is that section answering that question of why you're the appropriate person to do the job. So a lot of the CV stuff is going to be cite elsewhere, but you want to talk about why, remembering that this is an investigator and capability section, is why are you the best person to do the research that you're proposing here. The project quality and innovation maps to those that selection criteria. So it's why what are you going to do, how are you doing it, why is it new, and why is it important? I find it a little bit hard to think about how you're going to start with that investigator section and talk about why you're the appropriate person to do the research before you've explained at all what the research is. So you're going to have to use that capability section to foreshadow what's coming. So you can at least provide those kind of broad overviews of what the requirements of the project are going to be, so what capabilities are going to be necessary, so that you can describe why you're the appropriate person to do them. And then you're just addressing that series of questions. So if you've got assessors who are really paying attention to the criteria, you want to be mapping off all of these questions that the ARC is asking you to consider addressing. So you want to make sure that it's clear what the gap is. You want your project to be clear, what your research questions are to be clear. Talk about, so this, they've got an explicit thing in here about why your project has the potential to enhance international collaboration. If they're asking you to do that, I would think about how you're going to do it. That could be forming new collaborative networks, it could be going to conferences, it could be spending time in a research group outside of your current network, building a new collaboration that way. And that's a particularly good way to work on if you are someone who's been at Monash a long time. So if you've done maybe your PhD here, your first postdoc here, and you're now proposing to do a DECRA here as well, you can use this enhanced and international collaboration opportunity to say, look, I'm going to go and study at this amazing group off at wherever they are, and then simultaneously cover that off. So this is really explaining why your research is new and important, what you're going to do, and how you're going to do it. This is the benefit section. So each of these are headings that you're going to have to address. You're going to make sure you have text in all of them. Why should Australia care? Why should Australia be funding this research? So you're generating new knowledge, economic and cultural things, and then the national science and research priorities. So check those out. See if the research that you're doing aligns to any of those. See if there's any other stated government priorities that it might align to that fall outside of those science and research priorities. But it's all about sort of trying to be well informed about what Australia has said it cares about, and then you say why your research maps to that. So why is Australia going to pay for this stuff? And why is it going to work? So again, now we're addressing off that next bit of why should you do it here and why is it going to work? So you're talking a little bit about the cost effectiveness here, bearing in mind that there is another section where you justify your budget. So cost effectiveness and value for money here can be, Monash is a great place to do this because we have particular computing facilities. We have a platform that allows us to do this cheaply. We have some infrastructure that allows us to do it in ways that other people can't. So if you can justify, for example, that your research capitalizes on previous investment, that works out really well. So if other schemes have supplied, so my lab has a bunch of kit in it, which was paid for by a linkage infrastructure equipment and facilities grant. So people who would be coming to my lab would say, the ARC's already bought all this cool stuff. Now if they give me salary, I'm going to exploit it. So that makes the research cost effective because they're able to access $1 million pile of kit for $50,000 a year of DECRA plus a bit of salary. So cost effectiveness speaks to what the capabilities here at Monash, and that also justifies why Monash is the place to do it. So the platforms are really good for that. If you can align to one of those, or if it's appropriate to align to one of those. think I've talked about pretty much all of those already. So DECRA candidate, why the environment is supportive. There's a little bit of a line to walk on this one. What you don't want to do is say that your project is going to be supervised by this world-leading person, and that's why Monash is the best place, because that makes it seem like it's really the world-leading person's project. Monash could be a great place because of infrastructure and because of the intellectual environment and maybe the mentoring that that person will provide, but you want to use language that separates you apart as an independent researcher. You're not a line report, you're not a supervisee of these people, you are mentored by them as well as other people. So you want to distinguish yourself from the group around you. This isn't just funding Professor X to get a postdoc in their lab, this is funding you to do research more independently than a typical postdoc would be. Whether that's how it works out in practice is mostly irrelevant. You're sort of playing to the ego of the ARC and how they expect it to work. So make it about mentoring, not about supervision. Make sure you get that language, making it seem like the project is independent. And then at the end, there's a just communication of results. There's some requirements for that sort of stuff, about how data's stored and all of that sort of stuff. You can usually take that from, get some advice from previous applications, read some previous successful grants, what they've said about communication of results. I usually just say journals, conferences, say that I give interviews to print and radio and that sort of stuff, media. So, the last words of advice on the project description: takes time to get this right. Crafting that message so that it can be produced in 2 or 3 minutes, or 1 or 2 minutes by the college members is really hard. Look at what other people have done. Have lots of people read your graphs. Give people time to read your drafts. And then this bottom one sounds trite, the try to enjoy it bit, but I actually think it's really important, because if, like, sort of imagine someone reading through 20 DECRAs, 30 DECRAs. If they don't get a sense of enthusiasm from the person who wrote it, if it's kind of flat and dull and lifeless, and they're 13 grants in already, and they're like, ugh, this person doesn't care, why should I? If you can try and find joy in putting together the ideas and writing the grants and try and get excited about what you might do, that will come across in your writing. And I think that's really important. You want to take that reader with you. The problem is if you get excited and then you get a negative outcome at the end, that sucks. But don't worry about that. Just think about trying to put that joy on the page, be excited about what you want to do and convey that to the reader, bring them with you, so that at the end of it, they're like, they think this is exciting and they're willing to go and have a fight with the other assessors to make sure this one's funded. So try and get that joy across. I think that's actually really important and kind of underappreciated. So your rope section.
I just have a couple of questions.
Yeah, sorry. How far there?
Taking it all out together.
Cool.
So in the sort of more traditional older format, you have
Yep.
the first page, which is sort of aims and project description, summary, abstract.
Yep.
And then the second page sort of had background.
Yep.
And then you went into what the project actually was.
Yep.
Because none of those is project description.
Nope.
Sort of annoying. So they,
So the project description has no project description in it, correct?
so they fall into project quality and innovation.
Correct.
I guess.
Yep.
As does now the abstract first page, but there's no stated spot for sort of background information.
Nope.
Whereas people used to have a heading like background.
Yeah. So so if you go to the quality bit, so the sort of novelty, originality, and innovation of the proposed research, that can only be stated building on background, and the clarity of the hypotheses gives you the chance to, if they have to be clear, they also have to be there, right? So it's kind of that section where you're going to have that background building to your aims.
Should we put in, like, copy and put in the headings that people have used previously? I guess the non-capital lead headings. Like,
It's a good question.
About, like, what signposting? They used to be more clearly
Yeah.
signposted, but they've sort of broken that. But do we keep trying to use some of it, or do we
So I guess you're,
start from scratch in this new world?
yeah. Yeah, how much do you trust people to be aware that the new world exists?
Yeah.
Not much would be. So I personally like signposting wherever it's possible. So I like subheadings and things like that. I like using subheadings to provide white space as well, so that it's not just a block of 10 pages of text. So I would probably use subheadings, whether they're the ones that were there previously. I'm not sure whether I would rigidly stick to that, but I might use subheadings to break it up.
And then the other question is, what are your thoughts on, I guess probably it hasn't really changed, including things like figures and graphs
Yep.
in this section to support?
I really like a good colour figure, something that conveys, so the models I talked about before, I often put little simulations in, do that in a nice clear sort of illustrative way, rather than just kind of XY scatter plots or something like that. So I like a figure. I think about the message that I'm conveying to a reader when I put a figure in, and I feel like the message I'm conveying is that I know what needs to be done here, and I've got space for this, because all of these words are perfectly chosen and I've made space. So I like that it conveys a sense of sort of calm and control. A big wall of text feels like you're just scrambling to throw everything in and you don't really know what's important. But if you can make space for a figure, I reckon it suggests that. So in the old scheme, I try to put figures on my first page.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to work out where that would fit. So
Yeah, so it's,
bottom of page 2
yeah,
has an infographic.
yeah,
Maybe,
something like that perhaps.
and preliminary data graph when you get into the project
Yeah,
description.
somewhere in there perhaps. So white space is quite important in this, I think. It's easy to read. Yep.
Can you recommend like the length of the first page?
The length of the different sections.
Yeah, of saying for that first innovator.
Yeah, so the rule of thumb is you want to put as much emphasis on the sections as there are points in the selection criteria. So investigator capability is 50%. The hard part is investigator capability is also all of section F, because that's where your rope is. So I would probably be thinking for a fellowship scheme like this, probably 1 to maybe 2 pages for the investigator capability. Because I would also, personally, I think I would be blurring that into the foreshadowing of the project. So I'd be giving a bit of space to that. But you also don't want, you don't want that investigator section to be just too short and expect it all to be in the rope, because this gives you an opportunity to say things that aren't dictated in the rope section, which is pretty prescriptive. So if it's, I guess if it was, 2 pages, it's still only 20% of your project description, which is not that much. 1 page is 10%. The investigator is 50. So you're not taking up that, but then you've got section F. Cool. All right. So rope. So this is gives you an opportunity here to ask if you've experienced any interruption that's impacted on academic records. So we're now in section F, the research opportunity and performance evidence section. So if you've had an interruption that's impacted on academic record, so it says it can be selected from a series of, so you say yes, and then you get a drop-down box which says what the interruption is. So there's medical conditions, caring, non-research career, unemployment, or other things. So it's trying to be pretty broad, and we're told that the College of Experts members really care about this. There'll usually be people who are watching that stuff like a hawk. So that's really important. And then you get a chance to state the specific time frame of that academic interruption. So academic interruptions, time spent employed in other sectors, relocation, pregnancy, illness or injury, carer responsibilities, for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, community obligations. So you don't need to elaborate on any personal or confidential details, but this provides an opportunity to describe the impact of these interruptions on the DECRA candidate's career. So I've highlighted this section because the ARC really care about this stuff, but they can only care about it to the extent that you give them the information to make the judgment. And thinking again about that cheeky half point that Moira talked about, don't make it hard for them. Make it as easy as you possibly can. You don't need to provide the circumstances or the personal details or confidential details about it, but you need to give them timeframes, you need to give them numbers. You need to give them something that they can use to understand what this impact was. Now, the sad thing that I've seen from assessments is that it's probably worth preparing yourselves that the DECRA assessors are probably the meanest group of assessors I've seen, which is really annoying because it's the most vulnerable career stage that they're assessing. But the comments that you see come through that are just rubbish, frankly. It's really disappointing, some of the ones that we see. The College of Experts do a better job of that. But you've got to make sure that the college have the tools to really deal with it. So I've seen things like someone had, so they had maternity leave, and the language that the assessor used was that the candidate claims a period of maternity leave. It's like, no, she didn't claim it, she has it. There's a difference. Language is important. And you get comments like that. It feels to me like the assessors of DECRAs sometimes are a bit envious that they never got that sort of opportunity. And so you need to equip the College of Experts to deal with anyone who's out of bounds, not assessing a CV properly, not taking into account periods of career interruption. Give the college the tools and they'll do it. So this section is really important to make sure they've got that set of numbers that they need. Okay. So then you've got F17. So here in F16, you've got the chance to sort of say what the types of interruptions are. And then in F17, you've got a PDF of 5 pages. So 5 pages on top of the project description where you're just talking about yourself. You dictate the amount of time as an active researcher, research opportunities, research achievements and contributions. So these give you a chance to talk about the impact of your publications, but also your amount of time as an active researcher. So this is the important bit of information where you do have career interruptions that the college members can use to address them. So the ARC, sorry?
Is the amount of time as an active researcher counted from after you finished PhD
Yep.
or with your PhD?
Since PhD. Yep. So they've got the way that it's calculated. So they want you to provide the number of years since the DECRA candidate graduated with their highest educational qualification and a total FTE for periods of unemployment, part-time employment or interruptions, all of the reasons, and then they provide some example text. So it says, for example, I was awarded my PhD X years ago in whatever, and in that period I've experienced a total of 2 years of academic interruptions. I actually think this is a really bad way to state this sentence because the first number they get is, I was awarded my PhD 5 years ago and I've had 4.5 years of career interruptions. So you've really had 0.5 FTE since PhD, but the first number they get is 5. And so you've then got to disavow them of that. So if we go back to the previous section, it says amount of time as an active researcher. This sentence is the time since PhD and the amount of time of career interruption. This is not a statement of the amount of time as an active researcher. You can calculate the amount of time as an active researcher from this sentence, but it's not actually what that heading asks for. So I would say I have had 0.5 FTE since PhD of time as an active researcher. Maybe at the beginning of that sentence, MRO might say that they want this sentence, so you could give them that afterwards. But I would say I've had 0.5 and then I would have this. I was awarded my PhD this many years ago, I've had this much interruption. So the first number they get is 0.5 FTE since PhD, even though it's actually been 5 calendar years minus 4.5. So I would give them that number, make sure they've got it. Yep.
It might not be directly related, but when do you count those 5 years from? So, like in the UK, when you do your oral exam,
Yep.
you're awarded that you've got your PhD.
Yep.
From that date that you get
So
your PhD, or from when you graduate?
So it would be, so it's a time of conferral.
Okay.
So that would be the Viva for the UK, I guess because that's when you've got your PhD.
Yep.
Yeah, you're awarded the PhD.
Yep.
So here it wouldn't be the date of graduation, it would be the date that you receive the notification that the award has been conferred. But also, if there's ever any questions about that, they'll either know or they will contact the ARC and find out. So where there are questions of those kind of things, MRO are our conduit to the ARC. We ask them, they ask the questions. All right, big wall of text. So the research opportunities. Here is where we are providing the details. Okay, I've just got to read this again, make sure I get the right bit. So this is where you're covering off all of those opportunities that you've had throughout your career so that they can understand where it is that you're coming from, what your skills and capabilities are. So you want to try and paint all of the opportunities that you can in a positive light. So make sure that they understand employment situation, employment outside academia, all of these sorts of rules that they've got in here. You want to understand, they want to be able to understand what your opportunity is with respect to your position. So if you're a 5 years since PhD, but you're in a teaching and research role and 40% of your time is research, they need to know that. If you're in industry, what your breakdown of opportunity for research is. So this is all about providing that context to what your position has been. if you're in industry and you spent 20% of your time on research and 80% on administration, they need to know that you've only had 0.2 of each of the however many years devoted to research. The research mentoring and research facilities, I think, is actually quite an important part of this. So even now, when I apply for, I applied for a fellowship in the last round. When I applied for that, I talked about my PhD supervisor, which was, I finished in 2004. So I talked about what I gained from that experience. So the mentoring that I gained, the skills I gained, and then I talked about my postdoc, what I gained in that, and then my academic careers and the collaborations. So you can use this to build a story about what the mentors that you've had access to have given you. So you're starting to talk about capability, so that you're building up that picture of what your skill set is. You can also talk about it you can use it as an opportunity to distinguish your independence from your set of supervisors. So if you've had a PhD and a postdoc supervisor who differed, you can talk about what you gained from your first experience, what you gained from your second, and you can talk about how you've combined them to be the independent person that you are. So you can use these mentoring opportunities you've had to build up your story of independence. What makes you unique and special with respect to your supervisors? How is it that you're different from the mentoring that you've had? Any other details? So I think that's a good opportunity to talk about distinguishing yourself. And it's important not only if you've had diverse experience, but also if you are staying at Monash and you've had, say, PhD, postdoc, or just PhD here, it gives you an opportunity to talk about the mentoring and collaborations and other things that you've formed outside of your PhD supervisor. So why is it, even if you're staying with this PhD supervisor, why is it that you're different and special and amazing? So use this as an opportunity to talk about the great mentoring and skills that you've gained, but also how you're different. Separate yourself out from those people that you've worked with. And then this is the section that I talked about a little bit before, once you get to research achievements and contributions. So this section is separate to your list of publications. So section F18, you talk about your publications. So this is all the other things that you may or may not have done. So prizes, keynotes, research income, patents, IP, benefits outside academia, professional activities, all of that sort of stuff. So this is the section where you talk about the bits that don't fall under that traditional publication outputs. So talk about anything. These are the suggestions. So remember, it's a list. This can include list. So anything that distinguishes you, anything that makes you great. These are the sections where you put that in. Everything except publications which go elsewhere. Once we get to F18, this is a useful section because this is one of those great sections where you get to tell the panel, you get to tell the assessors what awesome looks like. So this is the research context. So they say clear information that explains the importance of different research outputs and expectations in the candidate's discipline. So what, of course, you're not going to do is say, you're not going to provide an example of what's the expectations and what's amazing in a discipline if it's stuff that doesn't apply to you. You're not going to say doing X is amazing, of course I've done Y. So you're going to structure this section in a way that paints you in the best possible light. So when I write these sections, I talk about what the tiers of journals are in my discipline. So you'll say, you've got to be honest and open. You say like Nature, Cell, Science, they're the big interdisciplinary journals. And then you cascade down into the leading discipline journals. And as I flag post what this hierarchy of outputs are, I'll talk about what I've got in those hierarchies. So there'll probably be a pyramid, more down the bottom, less up the top. But you talk about what the expectations for your discipline are, flag posting your achievements against those expectations. So what does an amazing theoretical physicist produce in terms of outputs? Talking about those in terms of what you've done wherever you possibly can. So tell them what matters, aligning it as strongly as you can to what you've achieved. But obviously don't take the piss. But use this to frame their expectations of what someone like you will look like if they're exceptional. And then you've got your publication list, 10 career best and the rest. Okay, so when you're preparing this section, when you're preparing this rope, my shoe's undone. When you're preparing this rope, there's a couple of things that you can do to separate you out from the field. So you always want to use evidence so it's research output, research opportunity, and performance evidence. You always want to use evidence to back up your claims. But of course, you get to decide what the evidence is. So choose the best evidence, basically. So a good example for me, so this is my Google Scholar page. And so there are keywords. I should point over here. So there are keywords: evolutionary physiology, metabolic rate, energetics, scaling, and body size. Google Scholar doesn't choose those, I do. And so if you were to click on those, I appear reasonably high up those lists. This is what you do for someone who's more senior in your career. But what you can do is you can choose the keywords that best capture your research outputs, and you could perhaps benchmark those against other people at a similar career stage or other DECRA applicants. But you choose the keywords, right? So you're choosing the set against which you're being compared. So for me, metabolic rate kind of sounds like it's a really broad keyword, but it's really only comparative physiologists that use that term in that way. And so it actually narrows down to a surprisingly small set of people. And so I look good against that small set of people. And so you can choose keywords that capture your CV better than other people's and use that as evidence of your performance in those areas. So it's kind of making sure that you pick the best way of presenting your CV if you're going to use quantitative evidence, and wherever you can, you should. So you're choosing how the set is defined, a certain number of years since PhD, DECRA applicants, people at Group of 8 universities, however it is that you want to do it, and you're choosing the metric on which everyone is being judged. So you've got quite a bit of power in that definition to choose people that make you look as best as you possibly can. So you can do that defining it by Web of Science. If you publish a lot in one good journal, you can say what your standing relative to other people who publish in that journal is. So I'm in the top 5% by productivity of this journal. And then it's really about choosing the evidence that paints you in the best possible light. So if you've got heaps of papers in Nature and Science, cool, mention them. If you've got lots of papers in discipline journals, excellent. So then you use the publication context and contribution section, the previous one, to make sure that the reader knows what good discipline journals are, so that they know that your publications are in good discipline journals. If you've got papers in journals that are relatively lowly ranked by impact factor, get the field-weighted citation impact of your papers, because field-weighted citation impact is number of citations divided by citation expectations for the journal. If the journal's lowly ranked, it won't typically have that many citations. If your papers have got more than that, you'll get a really good relative citation impact. So there's lots of ways of skinning this particular cat in order to try and get the best possible light on your CV. High impact journals are great. Discipline journals, if the people know what the good discipline journals are, use those. And even low ranked journals can be advantageous, because if papers in those journals don't get cited much, but yours does, an extra 1 or 2 citations can make a really big difference to the relative citation impact or the field weighted citation impact from Scopus. So poke around at those different metrics, try and find those that work good. Alt metric work good. Okay, my language is gone. Alt metrics can be really good as well. So if your research doesn't take many tweets to get quite good alt metric scores for papers, so you can use those as well. It's basically anything that you can do to try and paint your metrics in the best possible light, and then use that. And all of the DECRA recipients are named in RMS. So in the funding announcements, you can always find out who got DECRAs. You can go and check out their Google Scholar pages and see where you compare. If you compare really favorably, mention it. If you don't, don't. It's just choosing that. Like, there's no definition of what you need to provide for evidence. So choose the evidence. I was going to say manipulate the evidence, but present the evidence as positively as you possibly can, choosing the most positive aspects. So then you've got, next bit is your project cost. The only real trick when you come to the project cost is what happens in a functional sense is you will apply for a grant, you will ask for $49,560 per year. The ARC will fund on average 91% of that, and so you will get something less. And because you get something less, your budget is immediately kind of discarded, because the ARC can't really hold you to a budget exactly as you stated if they didn't give you all the money you asked for to do all of the things. What they will hold you to, and what particularly the finance office will hold you to, is you can only spend money under one of those categories, under a category for which you requested money from the ARC. So if you requested no personnel, so no casual staff, no RAs or anything like that, and then at year 3, you decide, actually, I'd really like 6 weeks of a casual to process these samples. Unless you requested money from the ARC under personnel, you can't spend money under personnel. You could write to the ARC and get permission, but it's better if you've got something under all those categories, because then it just ticks that box and you've got access to all that funding. I've highlighted down the bottom that the other category allows you to include things like publication costs, something handy, as Moira said, for the College of Experts to cut to bring you down to that 91%. And other costs also include reasonable and essential extraordinary costs to allow a participant who is a carer or who themselves requires carer assistant to undertake travel essential to the project. So you can include carer costs now.
So the publication cost will be like open access?
Yeah, stuff like that. So the ARC does require papers be made open access in a certain time frame. That can be done using the accepted version of manuscripts, but you can just ask for publication costs. So I usually ask for a few $1,000s every year, just so that it's there if it gets cut. Yeah. You never actually know what they cut, you just know what they cut to. But it means that they can look at that $50,000 and go, well, there's $4,000 of page charges, let's make it $46,000. It's kind of a psychological thing that the college members do. So yeah, include those carers costs if they're appropriate for you, and page charges are useful things to let them cut. You've got to write the budget justification. So the only trap here is that, remember, the college members don't like a padded budget. They like a budget that's reasonable. They want everything justified in terms of need and cost. It's not just justifying why it's not justifying that it costs X dollars. It's justifying why this piece of equipment is necessary. Why is this RA necessary? Why is this much time necessary for the RA? So you can talk about how long it takes to process samples. You need this many samples processed. You could talk about animal maintenance requires this many hours per week, and so you'll hire someone to do that for this many hours per week. It's all about justifying why have you made those particular choices? Why this many hours? Why do you need an RA as opposed to not needing an RA? Why do you need this piece of equipment? And they do expect, is that next? Yes. So they do expect not to be paying for big pieces of equipment. Now I think this probably mostly just carries over from like the Discovery Project scheme, but if you've got a $50,000 a year budget and you're spending $45,000 on equipment, that's probably going to start falling under this major request equipment thing. So the requests for major items of equipment are considered on merit, and you need to be able to explain why existing equipment isn't available. So this again loops back around to that why Monash component. So if the assessors know that there's a pile of kit that does exactly what you want at RMIT, but you're applying at Monash, and because you're at Monash, you need to spend $50,000 a year on that piece of equipment that already exists up the road, it's really hard to justify why this is the right place to work if you're buying equipment to duplicate equipment that's already available elsewhere, for example. So you start to undermine that why Monash case. You start to undermine the feasibility, because what if they cut the budget? If you've asked for $50,000 piece of equipment and they can't afford $50,000 a year and they don't fund it, does that mean your project's no longer feasible and so you won't be funded? So you've just got to watch out for this major, this big expenses on equipment, because they expect that the environment will be providing this, or you've got to make extraordinary justifications. And the overseas or the travel, you need to justify it. The way that I always think about this is, if your budget or if your travel, if a politician was to stand in front of a microphone and say, I've just done all this stuff, would you be pissed off about them? Like, would you be angry that they shouldn't be traveling around that much? If that's the case, if it's not, what do they call it, that pub test? If it seems extraordinary, you've got to be able to justify it. So I always think about, whenever I'm justifying the travel that I do, would a politician look like an arse if they were doing that sort of travel? So just make sure that you justify why that happens. And because they're so clear about the fostering of collaborations, it's pretty easy to justify under the DECRA scheme. They want you collaborating. They should have you traveling to do that. So just talk about why it is that that travel is necessary. Okay, so now we're back to that beginning bit. So this bit that I've left to the end, which everyone leaves to the end, but also dictates your assessors, which has big impacts. So your application title can be 75 characters, your summary is 750 characters, and your national interest test statement is oddly defined in a range from 750 to 1125 characters. So these are the sections of text that dictate your assessors. I also think of these as the sections of text that the minister might read when they make a decision about which ones they're going to fund from the recommendation list. So think about it in terms of the way that you compose these. They dictate pretty strongly who your assessors are going to be, but also what's the minister going to think if they have to answer why this project was funded, and that application summary is all they get. If they need to justify this project to the Australian people, what information are you giving them to do that? And they are very prescriptive about how you go about doing it. So you've got to use sort of aspirational terms. So you can't say it will do something, you've got to say it aspires to do something. So make sure you follow those. It's a really easy trip for, you'll send it to MRO and MRO will refer you to this series of text and say, go back and rewrite it. So just follow those instructions. And again, going back to the college members who are making those final decisions, they're going to see lots and lots of these and they're going to expect and be accustomed to that particular format. And it's going to irk them if they don't see it. So follow the rules, follow the advice, even though it is such a cumbersome way to write. I get told off by the MRO many times for not doing this, but you should. So that's more of the information about the summary. Yeah, and then you've got that national interest test. It's potential to have economic, commercial, environmental, social, cultural benefits. So why should Australia care? Why should the minister care? Why should the minister not be embarrassed to read this out when they announce the funding opportunity or the funding outcomes? So make sure you cover that. And I think we're pretty close to the end now. So we're now at the those field of research codes. So if you're not familiar with field of research codes, they fall into a bunch of divisions. So Division 1 is mathematical sciences. I think 2 is physics. I know 6 is biological sciences. 5 is environmental. So there's 2-digit codes that break up big categories. And then there are 4 and 6-digit codes that are sort of disciplines within each of these categories. So these are important for providing those terms that are going to be used to find assessors for your project and also to populate that committee that makes the decisions. So choose these wisely. You choose at the 6-digit level, which is the level below what I've shown here, but use ones that will get the right audience for your proposal. And unless, depending on how the committee is, how those selection committees are set up, try not to jump across those 2-digit codes too much, unless you're pretty confident that you're going to fall within one panel, because you don't want to have to go to 2 of those panels and get yeses from both of them. And then you've got the socioeconomic objectives. So the other categorization that you need to do, the other bit of statistical information is socioeconomic objectives, and there are things in there which is generating knowledge, training people. So it's not all about finding the most important applied outcome for the research, because those direct benefits of fundamental research are also in here as things that are proper socioeconomic objectives. And that's the end. My goodness. All right, hit me. Has anyone got any questions? Yep.
I have a question about like all how this happens. So they're assessing our project.
Yep.
And they're having this 2-minute pitch.
Yep.
And then let's say this committee has 100 projects to assess, and at the same day they're choosing which one is gonna.
It's a long meeting. It's not a single day meeting. But over the period of a small number of days, yes.
But do you know how it looked like? Like they're like, oh, I don't know, how they voting for it or?
Yes, there's a vote. So there'll be a pitch to the panel from the first carriage. The second carriage will then get an opportunity to chime in. Anyone else around the table, they'll also have seen all of the grants. They'll have the opportunity to read them if they want. They may also chime in, and then there'll be a vote about whether it gets moved up above or below the funding line. So at the beginning, they'll come in with a preliminary ranking that will have the cutoff in it. And so they'll know these ones above are currently destined for funding. These ones below are currently destined not to be funding. This sort of tier around here are the ones we're going to worry about, and they'll go through and discuss them. But it's pretty rapid fire. They're moving through lots of applications in a relatively short period of time. So there was one comment in the stuff that Kate Smith-Miles presented, that for her it's about, if there's something she really wants to approve, like really wants to support, she's got to be able to have it sort of loaded in her memory in a small amount of time. So it's sort of either between the discussions when she's up next, she's got to flick through her notes and find it, remember it, know where it is, remember details of it. So it's, yeah, that's where it's really important to be able to have that accessible. Yep.
With requesting equipment,
Yep.
like what kind of level would be considered expensive equipment, and what would be, if you're requesting equipment, what would be a reasonable amount for?
So it's, I think it's a little bit hard to know on this particular scheme. This is sort of, I think that's kind of like a standard bit of discovery scheme text. There's never going to be any particularly dramatic, particularly expensive equipment in a DECRA application because there's a $50,000 limit each year. So, I mean, so if you sort of think about it, if your entire budget is taken up by equipment, maybe there's no money to do other stuff.
Like, okay, so the practical thing is, let's say I want to purchase a $6,000 potential stack.
Yeah.
With university contribution, that would be.
Well, I think, so something like that would be fine.
Yeah.
Like in the sort of tens of thousands, it's probably okay. Once you're soaking up your entire budget in the first year with a big equipment purchase, that's going to have to be pretty strongly justified. And particularly that bit about, why is this not available elsewhere? Is it new? Is it just not in Australia? Is it just not in Victoria? Is this the right intellectual environment, but it just happens not to have that piece of kit? And the intellectual environment outweighs the equipment. It's those kind of justifications. But I think you're probably unlikely to fall too badly foul of that particular requirement just because the $50,000 budget cap will stop you from doing that. Yep.
I'm interested in how you would recommend we structure the project in some ways, and in part how that relates to the objectives that we list.
Yep.
So I've been told previously about applications, so I'm Hal's postdoc.
Yep.
About applications where they had sort of 5 or 6 objectives listed. No, wait, that was way too many.
Yep.
So it's better to have sort of 3 things that you're saying you want to do. The first thing you can do, like it's good and it's interesting, but you can definitely do it without too much extra stuff. The second one is more detailed and maybe building on the first, and then the third one is a bit more blue sky. The rewards will be higher, but the risks are higher too.
Yep.
And then yeah, you should sort of structure a project around that structure.
So I would probably say like 1 aim or objective is too few, 5 or 6 is too many, 3 is the same number of years as the grant, which is a kind of convenient number for people to not feel too frightened about. I might, that building it up in, so the way that you usually design a project is, particularly like say an honours project or a PhD project is core, exciting, more exciting. With a DECRA, I might be a little cautious about that, just because if I read, 1, 2, kind of okay, 3, well, this is the really exciting stuff, but also I'm going to expect this is probably not going to happen. So I might think that that's, 1 and 2 will get done, 3 won't. And so I'm actually not funding 3, I'm funding 1 and 2. So I might have, a similar amount of ambition across all of the aims. A feasible amount of ambition, no less than that. Not too much more than that, rather than one clearly blue skies thing that's not going to happen.
At the moment, I've got it more split. I've got a technological approach that I have a pretty good background in.
Yep.
And then 2 is a much more advanced, integrative working with the engineers on fluid dynamics.
Oh, there you go.
Application, which is using the data from one and then applying it into fluid dynamics. Essentially morphology, performance, and then 3 is evolution.
Yep.
And that sort of comes across the previous 2.
Yep.
That's sort of what it.
So the bit you're really going to have to watch with that is the feasibility for aim 1. Because if aim 2 and therefore aim 3 also, which goes over aims 1 and 2, hang on the feasibility of aim 1 and aim 1 doesn't work, that's where your feasibility score will suffer.
Preliminary data.
There you go, yeah.
We can definitely do this, we can definitely do this.
Yep. And doing research is about doing the next one, yeah. Yep. Okay. If no one has any questions, oh wow. I'm going to hang around for a short while, but also my email is craig.white@monash.edu. Feel free to get in touch if you've got any more questions. I imagine a feedback thing will come out to everyone to provide it, or just let me know. Letting me know what was good and bad about this will be really helpful, not so much for you, but for the next group of people, which maybe will include some people. But yeah, it's really valuable for me to know what worked and what didn't and how to improve these things so that we can try and help as many people as we can.
Could you please send us the...
Yes, so the slides will get distributed. There's also Moira prepared sort of a cheat sheet. It's a bit biology focused because that was a panel she was on, but I'll distribute that as well.